Support comes from St. Louis Public Library Foundation, helping the library serve children and their families with programs and services needed to become lifelong readers. More information about the foundation is at slpl.org.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Baseball has been called the national pastime since the New York Mercury gave the game that moniker in 1857. For all the changes this country's been through, the title has stuck, perhaps because of its aspirational nature and very much because of the people who have driven the pastime's most significant transformations. So this hour, we're discussing a new book that explores how baseball has become the sport we know it to be today. That book is titled Play Harder: The Triumph of Black Baseball in America. It's written by award-winning author and WashU professor Gerald Early in collaboration with the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. And joining me in studio to talk about Play Harder and the stories in it is Gerald Early. Gerald, welcome back to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So I would like to start sort of with your own connections, because baseball is more than an intellectual topic of interest for you, as I understand. What were your first experiences of the game, Gerald, both watching and playing it?
My first experiences with the game growing up in Philadelphia. And my grandfather was a rabid Philadelphia Phillies fan. Mm-hmm. And he took me to baseball games. And that's how I got into baseball, because my grandfather took me to games and he followed the Phillies religiously.
How did that manifest in your life?
I enjoyed going out with my grandfather. I enjoyed him taking me to ball games, and it made me want to play baseball. Mm-hmm. So I played baseball a lot when I was a kid. And that really made me love the game, was playing it, because I played the game and I said, no, I thought about this. I said, no, people are wrong calling soccer the beautiful game. Baseball is the beautiful game.
What positions did you play, Gerald?
I played first base, the outfield, but the position I played the most was catcher. And that was because most kids didn't want to play that position, so I knew if I volunteered to play that, I would always get in the game.
Right. Well, and the catcher actually does a lot in the game. What is it that you enjoyed so much about playing with it and made it such a beautiful game to you?
Oh, it was orderly. There's something about it that was orderly, but also it had its elements of surprise. I liked the idea that when you were on defense, you couldn't score, and there was a kind of purity about that really appealed to me, the distinction between being on offense and on defense. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that you played it at a wonderful time of year, so I just thought it was a great game.
Right. Did you have favorite players, and were they the same players your grandfather favored?
No, it was a little bit different. My grandfather was a Jackie Robinson guy, and he loved those old Brooklyn Dodger people, and I was too young to know who those people were. Mm-hmm. So my favorite people were people like Dick Allen, Richie Allen, who was the first big black star in Philadelphia, and Wes Covington. There were also other stars I like Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale. Warren Spahn. I love Willie Mays. I just loved him. Mm-hmm. And so those were my favorite players when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. As you were growing up, how much did you know, Gerald, about the history of Black Americans and baseball? I mean, for instance, were the Negro Leagues something that you heard your grandfather or other people talk about?
Yes, I did hear people talk about it. Particularly, my grandfather talked about it a little bit, but mostly it was in the barbershops. The older black men in the barbershops would talk about the Negro Leagues, which for us young kids annoyed us enormously.
Okay.
Because they would always say, oh, the Negro Leagues, their players were better than these guys you got playing now and all that kind of stuff. And we said, that was then and this is now, and I'm not interested in those guys.
So there's definitely, you're right, generational differences.
Yes, there was generational differences.
We want to invite you to this conversation. Which Black American baseball players have shaped your love of the sport? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. You can also email us at talk@stlpr.org. So clearly, Gerald, you have this close relationship with baseball through your grandfather, what you saw when you went to the stadium, what you played in the field. How is it that that you started to take this on into your career, going deep on baseball? How did it become a scholarly subject for you?
When I was in my 20s, I became very interested in wanting to examine certain aspects of Black culture that I thought at the time, or certain aspects of culture that Black people I thought had a big influence in, that I thought was understudied at the time. And one of them was baseball. And I started writing about baseball, and the first person I started writing about was Jackie Robinson. And that's what really drew me into wanting to learn the history of the sport, and appreciating the history of the sport, but wanting to be able to dig out of that how Black people impacted America through the sport.
When you were growing up, were there stories out there about Jackie Robinson? So, for instance, there's a series of books about famous people, who was such and such. And when I went to the bookstore just yesterday, I looked for who was Jackie Robinson, and sure enough, it's there. What were the things that you were growing up reading about Black players like Jackie Robinson, and was there something in particular that you feel like you were missing?
Well, when I was growing up, there wasn't nearly the selection of books that people have now, and certainly not the selection of children's books that people have now. I learned about Black players largely through reading the Black newspaper, because the Black newspaper would cover Black players. And Ebony magazine would have a special issue every year on baseball. And I read that religiously. I didn't read Ebony necessarily religiously, but I read that feature about Black baseball religiously in Ebony. And those were the things that I relied on to tell me about Black players.
And what was in that feature?
Ebony would have all the teams, all the major league teams, and who were the Black players on the team. And they even included Hispanic players as well on the team. And they would give you a write-up of the team and how they thought the team would perform that year. And that was like a little Bible for me.
Yeah, a man of faith in another way. So then when it came to the work that you did with American documentary filmmaker Ken Burns as a consultant on his 1994 television series, Baseball, how much of what you were getting from Ebony magazine, or even from the conversations that you had overheard in the barbershop when you were a child, really came into play with that work?
That's interesting about the whole thing with Ken Burns. By that time with Ken Burns, I had read several histories of baseball. I had read biographies of Jackie Robinson. I read books about Willie Mays. I was pretty schooled about certain things. But the interesting thing is that when I was working with Ken, what Ken wanted from me was really not that much scholarly stuff. What Ken wanted from me was to talk about my own experiences with the game. And so I said to him, I could talk a little more about scholarly stuff about it. He had a little bit of that with me in there. But I told this story about how when we played baseball, the Black kids I was with when we played baseball, we always started the game by singing the national anthem, because that's how
right.
That's what we were used to in watching baseball games. That just is how you start a baseball game.
Make it authentic.
Yes,
right,
to make it
right.
authentic. So, you had a bunch of the ragamuffin black kids who were on this field getting ready to play, and all of us see the national anthem. Adults going by must have thought it was really comical. But Ken loved that story, and he used it in the documentary about us singing the national anthem. But that's how we thought you made a baseball game authentic.
Right,
was that you sang the national anthem. We felt very patriotic, actually, doing
well,
that.
national pastime, that's certainly apropos. So if we fast forward to 2022, what is it that you were thinking about as a writer and a scholar when Tom Schreiber, who's the head curator at the National Baseball Hall of Fame Museum, when Tom reached out to you, what was his ask at that time?
Tom said he was interested, the museum was interested, Cooperstown was interested in wanting to revamp the black baseball exhibit that they had. They wanted to do more than just touch it up or something like that. They really want to reconceive the whole thing. And he said, I think you would be helpful in doing that. And I said, yeah, maybe I could be, I said I would be interested in doing it if you want me to do it. And, and working with you about that. And you let me know. And actually, after I got finished talking with him, I thought I would never hear from him again. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, he said, yeah, I want you to do this thing. So I was flattered that he wanted me to do this. Because I was thinking about, if you want somebody to do this, you get somebody like Larry Lester or people like that, because Larry Lester knows Negro League baseball, knows black baseball and stuff like that. So I was kind of flattered that he wanted me to do it. But I was also into it. I wanted to do it because there were some things thoughts I had about baseball that I wanted to get out there.
Right. Such as?
Well, I was thinking about how if you're going to revamp this thing, I would like to have a greater tie between black history and black baseball, and to make it really like black baseball becoming like almost a social history of black people, that you could tell this story in such a way that you're actually giving people a kind of story about black people's encounter with America, black people dealing with being American and what it's costing them to try to be American. And that was what I was thinking, if I could get this in to this exhibit, I would feel very good.
Yeah. Was there a particular story that you were thinking about including in the work to be, because this is 2022, insofar as providing sort of that more social approach to, or angle to, telling the story of Black Americans in baseball?
There was one very small example with Jackie Robinson. And I remember we had at one of the sessions, I said, Jackie Robinson won the Spingarn Medal. And the Spingarn Medal is this important medal that the NAACP gives out every year to the black person who they feel has done the most for civil rights, uplifting the image of the race, and so forth. I said, it's a very important thing to win. And I said, only 2 black athletes have ever won this medal, and both of them have been baseball players. And Jackie Robinson was one and Hank Aaron was the other. And I said, why don't we put his Spingarn medal, Jackie Robinson's Spingarn medal, on display because it really ties into his standing as a black person outside of baseball, that he was an important figure to black people beyond just baseball that he got this medal. And they had never heard of the Spingarn medal.
Oh.
So that was new to them. But they were on board as soon as I told them about this. And then they discovered that they didn't have the Spingarn medal. But they actually wound up being able to borrow it from the Jackie Robinson Museum in New York. There's a Jackie Robinson Museum in New York, and they had the Spingarn medal.
Right.
They were able to get it.
So is the medal, is it still on loan and now at the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, as far as I know, it's still on loan.
Had you seen it before?
Nope, I hadn't seen it before. I'd only seen pictures of it.
Right. Have you seen it now?
Yes.
What is it like to see that?
Oh, it was very important to me. It was really because I really felt that it really tied together this man, Jackie Robinson, and Hank Aaron, who won it too, as not only just these great athletes, but they were these great emblems of the race, that they had done something through their athletic endeavors that had done something important for the race and something important for us as Black Americans. And so I was actually rather moved seeing it.
Yeah. We're going to take a very quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation with Gerald Early, author of the new book, Play Harder, The Triumph of Black Baseball in America, which he wrote in collaboration with the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We also want to hear from you. Is there an American Black baseball player or figure who has shaped your understanding of the national pastime? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
Let's pick up our conversation today with Gerald Early, an award-winning writer and professor at WashU. We're spending this hour talking about his new book, Play Harder, The Triumph of Black Baseball in America, which was published on April 29th in collaboration with the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Gerald, before the break, we had invited people to join our conversation. You mentioned Hank Aaron, and one of my colleagues here, David, had said that Hank Aaron is a Black player who's really shaped his understanding of American baseball. And he wrote Breaking the HR record, home run record, and then Breaking the Color Barrier by always taking the high road with his unwavering professionalism is something that David remembers. Not until years later did I learn about the threats he received while chasing the home run record. So Hank Aaron was with the Milwaukee Brewers in the 1950s, and our producer Danny Wysentowski also shared an anecdote about his uncle having to be out playing with his friends, and a man that they saw who turned out to be Hank Aaron was very friendly with them. It was a very starstruck kind of moment for them. Are there a lot of stories that you have heard in research for this book about the way these major figures, not just in Black baseball, but in American baseball, were just regular people kind of doing their own thing?
Yes, you do run across things like this. It was easier for ball players to be sort of regular people or interact with regular people when there was less celebrity surrounding it, and they were being paid less money. And it was surprising when I learned, for instance, that back in the 50s, that when the Brooklyn Dodgers lost the World Series to the Yankees in one of those 1950s World Series, some of the Brooklyn Dodger players went home on the subway. I mean, that's just unthinkable now that players would do something like that. But they went home on the subway. And so I think that there was even more interaction then, because the salary differential between what a ball player was getting then and what the average American was getting then was not as dramatic as it is now. And so ball players have moved up on a sphere that's more that's quite incredible compared to average people. So I think they have really distanced themselves from being average people in some way.
Right. I can attest to that, having visited LA recently, and after they're winning the World Series, the amount of energy, to put it in a kind way, around that is very, very high. Now, Gerald, before we get back into some more stories, I'd like to hear more about the title of this book. In the acknowledgments, you thank folks at 10 Speed Press for rolling the dice and going along with you about the title. So what was it was it the play harder part or the triumph of Black baseball portion that you had to have some conversations with people about?
Well, the story about the title of the book is that this book is meant to accompany an exhibit. The exhibit at the museum is called The Souls of the Game. That's the name of the exhibit. Now, when I had a meeting with the publisher and the editor and everyone, the publisher immediately came into the room and said, I don't want to call it Souls of the Game because that's too esoteric for me, and I want a title that's something that players actually said.
Okay.
So he suggested, Let's Play 2, which was something that a Black player named Ernie Banks was famous for saying. Ernie Banks gave an aura of really so much loving the game that he said, why play 1? Let's play 2.
Oh, I see. Okay. So TWO.
Yeah, TWO.
Right.
So he wanted to use that. And I said, I don't think we can because there have been 2 biographies written of Ernie Banks that have come out in the last half dozen years, and both of them use that as the title. So I don't think we can do that. I think it's too associated with Ernie Banks. So this is when I suggested Play Harder, and at first people weren't too interested in that title. And then I had to read them the quotes that they wound up using in the book.
Yes. On the front covers and inside covers.
And in the inside cover.
Yeah.
And I read to them all these quotes of Black players using some version of that expression. And then they said, oh, okay, it's short, and they actually said this.
Right. It sounds like a charge, play harder, or a command. But it was also something that Black players said to themselves in order to raise their spirits, right?
Yes. It was a kind of way to give themselves a pep talk if they felt adversity, if they felt particularly when integration of baseball was happening and facing a lot of hostility and so forth, that they felt that they had to say this. In part because I always felt they were saying this to sort of pep themselves up about, I'm not going to fail, so I'm going to play harder. So failure is not an option. So I always found it to be kind of inspirational. And I guess after they heard all these quotes from these players, I guess the people at 10 Speed felt it was inspirational too.
So with any book with stories, there are the stories and then there's the narrative. And you mentioned earlier that you wanted to talk about the social aspects of the way baseball, Black American baseball, told a story about society, about culture. To what extent did that framing give you and your collaborators some room to tell stories of major figures and events in a different way than other books that are already out there?
Well, the hope was in approaching this that we could talk about what baseball was with the Black community, how the Black community was shaping a sense of itself around engaging this game, as a game, as a business, as almost a kind of cultural endeavor to show we're Americans too, because this is the American game. But we are also Americans on our own terms because we can start a business around this. If you want to segregate us, that's fine. We will still play this game in our own world and in our own way. And I think that's an important story and an important way of seeing this narrative so that you're not just dismissing it, people are just playing a sport. No, I think there was a lot more at stake than just people playing a sport.
And they were doing it very, very well. If we think about the integration of Negro League's statistics into Major League Baseball records, that integration knocked a lot of people out of those top positions in records, right?
Yes, it did change. It did change some things with the records. It was important for that to happen because finally the Negro League players were given their sense, was the Negro Leagues were given legitimacy, because the one thing that was always questioning their legitimacy was they didn't have complete statistics, and so you really couldn't judge the players because the statistics weren't complete, and they weren't as reliable as Major League statistics or white baseball statistics. So to do this was extremely important. And also it recognized something else, that the Negro Leagues were able to produce players of the same quality as the Major League clubs did. And that was important because black people did this as their own enterprise. They developed these players themselves. And so it was important for people to recognize that.
You talked earlier about consulting for Ken Burns in the 1994 television documentary series, and that Ken Burns was less interested in some of the research or the scholarship and more about your personal experiences. Did you get to flex some of that, the scholarship that you've done, the research that you've done, when it came to talking about the Negro Leagues, in this book?
Yeah, I think I finally was able to with this book. I think it was one of the reasons I wanted to do the book was that I said, if I do a book, then I can really get out in a sustained way, telling this story in the way I want to tell it, and really making the case for how important it was for black people playing baseball for America. Because I told the people at 10 Speed, I said, black people playing baseball made America a better country. I said, that's a very important point for you to understand. And that's the overall theme I wanted to present in the book, that black people playing baseball made America a better country.
To bring things closer to home, where we are now, Gerald, St. Louis is much touted as a baseball town, and you went so far as to say in the book that it's considered something of a crime to live here and not to follow Major League Baseball. Now, there's a street named after a Negro Leagues legend, James Thomas Cool Papa Bell. And I just learned, actually, that Jerry Mitchell, who was STLPR's morning host some years ago and who's now at WAMU in Washington, was or is Cool Papa Bell's goddaughter.
Oh, wow.
So there's a connection there. How is it that you approached writing about Cool Papa Bell, especially because, so many people here locally at least, know of him? And were you thinking more globally about what people might not know about this player?
Yeah, I was probably thinking more globally than thinking locally about my connection to St. Louis or St. Louis readers. I did think about St. Louis readers with something else, but not with that. Cool Papa Bell was essential in telling the story about the Negro Leagues because of his, not only because he was a great player, but because he was an interesting man. And part of telling these stories was that, part of it's about great players, but it also has to be about interesting people, and that I'm introducing people that you would find interesting to learn something about. Because, as I told my wife, I said, my wife is not a baseball fan at all. And I told my wife, I'm going to write a book that you can read.
What made Cool Papa Bell an interesting man to you, Gerald?
Cool Papa Bell was an interesting man because he was his attitude about baseball at first was that he wanted to play. I don't know if he was completely committed to playing, but he understood his limitations, his physical limitations, and so he adopted ways of playing, and the people around him helped him to do this. He adopted ways of playing that really exploited his strengths, and because he wasn't a big home run hitter or something like that. As he said, I am a trickster. I play tricky baseball. And I thought that was a real kind of contrast between a player like Oscar Charleston or Josh Gibson, who are these big, masculine, tough take no prisoner type players. And here was a guy who was a small guy, who was a speed guy, and could excel in this game and make a huge impact in this game without being one of these big tough guys that like a Josh Gibson or something hitting a lot of home runs.
Right. I loved reading about how Cool Papa Bell was that he trained to hit left-handed. And the way that he was stealing bases, it was just so vivid. Did your wife like this story?
Yeah. I think she was quite impressed with that about the book and the stories in the book. But Cool Papa Bell is an interesting story about how a player is made. I mean, in some ways, I'm telling stories about, players got this great athletic ability or something like that. But I'm also wanting to tell you about personalities, about how people kind of willed themselves to being good players. And he kind of did that. He made himself a left-handed hitter. He was not a left-handed hitter.
Well, and the Negro Leagues themselves were made.
Yes,
right?
The Negro Leagues were made. And it's important to understand that they were made and that people were going about doing this because they wanted to show, Rube Foster, Ed Bolden, all the other people involved with this, wanted to show that black people could run a league, could have organized baseball, and could do this and could sustain this.
In learning about all of this with the Negro Leagues, players like Cool Papa Bell, did it make you think a little bit differently about what you heard, what is now called the old heads talking, in the barber shop or in the community?
Oh, sure. By this time, yeah. I had come to appreciate the Negro Leagues. But when I was a kid, of course, you're only interested in what you yourself have experienced in your own time. You're not in... You think the world started when you were born.
Right. It doesn't.
Right, and it doesn't. But it takes you a while, a little bit of maturity to understand that the world didn't start when you were born. But when you're a kid, you think the world started when I was born, and what happened before that is of no interest to me. And but no, and it became important to me to learn about the Negro Leagues, to learn about early black baseball, because it became important for me to understand who those black men were who were telling me about the game. And then I got to a point where, I want to understand who those men were.
Right. We got an email from Reggie Bates, speaking of the times in which we're growing up and watching baseball. He said, I enjoyed watching Reggie Jackson, Barry Bonds, Bobby Bonilla. Jackie Robinson has always been an inspiration to me. My grandmother, Bernice, who is the one who taught me how to listen to the game on the radio and to feel the excitement. And this is a great place for us to take a little bit of a break, but we will be back shortly to continue this conversation about the new book, Play Harder, The Triumph of Black Baseball in America. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Welcome back. This hour, we're talking with WashU professor and award-winning author Gerald Early about his latest book titled Play Harder, The Triumph of Black Baseball in America. It was published on April 29th and is available at bookstores everywhere. Now, before the break and earlier in our conversation, Gerald, you had talked about the way that baseball did not pay players in the way that they are paid now. And one of the things that I really appreciated in reading about this book, my baseball education in St. Louis has come primarily from conversations like these. And so with reading your book, learning about the story of former Cardinals outfielder Curt Flood, it really has stayed with me. Now, last month, Curt Flood's daughter, Shelley, spoke about her father's legacy, how he changed Major League Baseball's reserve clause, and how that paved the way to free agency.
Growing up Curt Flood's daughter has been an amazing honor, and I have taken on that identity more so in the last 20 years. Cooperstown is the venue that houses the history of baseball. And if my father is not included in that historical value, then what he did is overlooked, even though current players today are free agents. And that's what my father so diligently fought for. That venue, Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, will allow us the indelible history to be always known to generations to come.
And that was Curt Flood's daughter, Shelley Flood, speaking on Fox 2 News. Now, a listener named Andy on Facebook echoed Shelley Flood's case for her father's place in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, writing, Curt Flood shaped the game we love more than almost any other in history. And in 2021, on his show, Back on the Record with Bob Costas on HBO, the esteemed sportscaster and journalist Costas described what Curt Flood did for baseball and the price Flood paid for it.
Flood was a distinctive player and an even more distinctive individual, well-read and with a variety of interests, which included his active participation in the 60s civil rights movement. And when, after the 1969 season, the Cardinals traded him to the Phillies, Flood decided he wouldn't go. He had his reasons.
It's been a master and slave relationship. As long as you do what I say do, you're fine.
Flood's cause was taken up by Marvin Miller and the Players Association, and eventually went all the way to the Supreme Court, where it lost on a narrow vote. Still, a statement had been made, an important one, on the long path to players' rights, even if Flood himself would never reap the tangible benefits. He'd play only 13 more games in the majors. By that point, a broken man, both emotionally and financially.
And again, that was Bob Costas making the case in 2021 for Flood to receive the Buck O'Neil Lifetime Achievement Award, which is given every 3 years. Gerald, what do you think and feel hearing those voices talking about Flood?
Well, it's quite something. I met Curt Flood back in 1994 when Ken Burns premiered baseball in Washington, and there were some former players there and a whole bunch of dignitaries, and Curt Flood was one of them. It was very nice meeting him. He was a very gracious man, and I really enjoyed meeting him. It was the highlight of this whole thing of being in Washington and the premiere of the baseball documentary. Flood could be put into the Hall of Fame probably on the basis of what he did as a ball player. A case could be made for that. He was really a very accomplished ball player. Mm-hmm. The putting him in because he stood up for the reserve clause, that can be done too. I mean, Marvin Miller is in, and Marvin Miller was the head of the union, and so putting Curt Flood in, I think, would be a very good thing, and it's overdue recognition. The interesting thing is that now Dick Allen, who Curt Flood was traded for, when the trade happened with Philadelphia, Curt Flood and a couple other players were traded for Dick Allen and a couple other players, and Dick Allen had been a big headache for Philadelphia for the years he had been there, and so he was traded to the Cardinals. And what's interesting about that is that Dick Allen is going into the Hall of Fame this summer. So in some ways, it would only seem like a kind of poetic justice of a sort that Curt Flood should go into, the man he was traded for.
Yeah.
So I feel that it's long overdue, and that Curt Flood should be in the Hall of Fame. He certainly deserves that. And he changed the nature of the game. He lost his case, but he wound up, he had the support of the union, and he wound up opening the door, which opened really a few years later for free agency. And free agency not only changed baseball, it changed the nature of professional sports in the United States.
Yes, it did, including basketball.
Changed them all.
Mm-hmm. So as we are talking about Curt Flood and what he went through and what he lost, clearly there is a level of triumph in what he went through. The trade to Philadelphia, very specifically, and it will go back to where you are from and where you grew up, Gerald. What was it about Philadelphia that made him not want to go there that is, particularly pertinent to the conversation we've been having this hour?
I laugh because Philadelphia at the time did not have a good reputation among many black people. At the time that happened, the most prominent political figure in Philadelphia was the police commissioner, who was named Frank Rizzo. He would become the mayor of the city in 1971. He's Italian American. He had built up this image of being the tough cop and so forth. And he really cracked down on any kind of civil rights demonstrations in Philadelphia. And so that kind of gave the city this reputation of being a cop dominated city, which is not untrue. And that image, I think, was one of the things that made Curt Flood not want to go to Philadelphia. There may have been reasons as well with the team itself.
Sure.
But the image of Philadelphia itself for many black people was not an inviting one, shall I say.
Sure. Well, and I think to this point, that is about who is in charge in different places. But this is also something who's in charge that is covered in the book and management, who's in front office or who is leading on the field. There is the conversation, the ongoing conversation about who gets to lead. How is leading also harder? Could lead harder be one of the subtitles for the chapter in this book that covers that?
Yes, I suppose it could have been. And, one of the things that people have to remember with black people's experience with baseball, because they formed teams and formed leagues and they had an engagement with baseball in developing it as a business and as a sport in the community, they had a deeper engagement with it than they had with any other sport on a professional level, because they really had developed it on a professional level. That black people ran teams. When they had the Negro Leagues, they ran the league,
right.
They ran teams, they were general managers, they were managers, they were owners. So black people have a history of having done that. And so when integration occurred, and since integration did not include bringing over the structure of the Negro Leagues, but only individual players, so it was in some way for many black people feeling as though they had to start over again insofar as moving up into management, but it was something that black people had done. They managed these teams, and they managed this league. So it's been an uphill struggle, and, when Al Campanis made his famous remarks about black people not having, as he put it, the necessities to be general managers and all that kind of stuff, it really put baseball on the spot. This is back in the 80s. It really put baseball on the spot about that black people really. Here was a prominent white baseball man who was a prominent executive with the Dodgers, saying, well, black people, have you ever noticed that black people don't swim?
Oh, brother.
No, I mean, he
Right.
And, it's the same thing, that black people just don't have the necessities to lead. That's a very important thing about one thing to participate and another thing to move up the ladder to lead.
Right.
And black people have, have kind of, that's the new civil rights doorway that has to be gone through, is black people actually being able to lead. that's why, electing somebody like Obama as president was such an important thing for this country, to have a black person leading the country.
The peak of Black American players in Major League Baseball was nearly 45 years ago in 1981. And the book includes the results of a USA Today survey from 2023 showing that 5 Major League Baseball teams didn't have a single African American on its roster opening day, and then 9 other teams had just one. How much of this absence, void of Black Americans in leadership in baseball do you think has led to this smaller number of players on the field?
Well, I would say it certainly has some connection. I think there's a complex set of reasons for that happening. Some of it, I think, has to do with leadership at the top. I think some of it has to do with black fans engaging the game. I don't think black people engage the game of baseball as much as they used to. And I think that's had an effect. Black people have migrated more to football, both collegiate and professional football, collegiate and professional basketball. If you ask most black people in the street, what's your favorite sport? They aren't likely to say baseball is number one. I mean, baseball may come in third, fourth, fifth, but it's not going to be number one. It's going to be the football or basketball. Most likely it's going to be the number one sport. And so black people have become, I think, in some degree alienated from baseball. And I think the league is trying to make some efforts to bring black people back into baseball. But I think the lack of black Americans has a lot to do with fans not engaging the game as much, leadership issues, black people feeling access to the game in order to learn to play it. So people have put out a lot of things. I think it's a combination of those things.
Mm-hmm. Do you think pipeline programs are enough to revive the interest of Black Americans in baseball? Or is there maybe a need for more big figures like, Cool Papa Bell, even Mookie Betts, who wore an airbrush T-shirt at the 2019 All-Star Game, the workout game that said, "We need more Black people at the stadium"?
Yes. Yeah, I think that there is a need for having figures out there like that, and I do think that it's harder with access than people might think. As I said in the book, Tony Regans, who's the MLB, Major League Baseball, he's the point guy for trying to develop more black players. As he himself said, quoted in the book, as saying, I thought this was going to be a lot easier than it's turning out to be. I thought in a couple years we will have tons of black players in the pipeline, black kids in the pipeline. It hasn't turned out that way. And so he's hopeful about it, but it hasn't turned out that way of getting more into the pipeline. Part of it is because baseball is not an embedded thing in black school culture. Black school culture is very much built around, the sports is built around football and basketball. It's not built, high school sports for most black kids, not built much around baseball. Also, college baseball is not as big as college football and basketball. They don't give out as many scholarships. Black kids don't get funneled that way. So there are lots of things that's choking off a pipeline, and that's one of the reasons why there are fewer black Americans.
In our final minute here, Gerald, the cover image for this book, what does this have to do, if anything, with the way that the book concludes, which is the long hello and bringing more Black Americans into baseball again?
Well, this cover image of Willie Mays sliding into home, I remember that the publisher gave me a choice of asked me my opinion of several different photos, and I said, this is the photo that has to go on the cover. Not one, because I love Mays, and Mays had just recently died when we were talking about putting a picture on the cover, and I wanted something to remember Mays. But it captured for me the whole experience of black baseball, the whole effort behind it, effort the strenuous nature of it, but also the kind of beauty and grace of it. And I thought that was just really important, and I hope that that was being conveyed in the book.
Gerald Early is the author of the new book, Play Harder, The Triumph of Black Baseball in America, and a professor at WashU. Gerald, thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you for having me.
This episode was produced by Elaine Cha.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.